Welcome back to the SCIdeShow podcast. Apologies for my absence for the last few weeks. I've been doing some tweaking behind the scenes that should make things run a little more smoothly from here going forward. On this episode, it is my first interview ever, and it is with Dr. Bob Kroll of the Speech and Stuttering Institute in Toronto. As a few listeners may have noticed, I do in fact have a stutter. And I decided to speak to Bob to get to the science behind stuttering, and it was quite an experience learning all of this. Now, this will be an unedited episode. It was Bob and I in the same room, so you will be hearing my stutter as I speak, so I didn't erase any during the editing process. One thing I will note is the audio quality. There was a slight issue that I did not notice until after editing the episode, so I do apologize for that. And now, let's hear me talk to Bob Kroll. Okay, so right now I am interviewing Bob Kroll, who is the chairman of the board of directors for the Speech and Stuttering Institute in North York, Ontario. Bob? Thank you very much for doing this podcast. This is my first interview ever, so hopefully things go all right from here.
Okay, thank you for having me. I feel honored to be your inaugural interviewee.
Thank you very much. Okay, so before we get started, would you just like to tell my listeners just a little bit about yourself, just how you came into this position? And
Sure. So I'm a trained speech and language pathologist. That involves university training for helping people with all sorts of communication disorders. I was trained initially at McGill University with my master's degree, and then went on to Bowling Green State University in Ohio, where I obtained my doctorate in speech and language pathology.
Cool.
Following that, to make a long story short, I was head of speech pathology at the old Clark Institute of Psychiatry in Toronto, which is now CAMH, Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It used to be called the Clark Institute. And that was my first job. And my second job was here at the Speech and Stuttering Institute, where I became the executive director of the Speech and Stuttering Institute, a position I've held for the past 20 years. And now passing on the torch to my colleagues and assuming the chairmanship of the board of directors of the Institute. So just making sure that we continue to provide the services and the research and the training that we're noted for.
All right. Wow. Oh, well, that is quite the resume.
Well, 43 years. It's hard to encapsulate 43 years in a couple of sentences, but I've been around in this field for a while.
Yeah, well, you did a really superb job at summarizing the whole thing. You hit all of the important pieces there. Yeah, so how have things been here for you so far?
Well, I really feel very fortunate having been, A, chosen the field that I'm in, and B, having worked at the Speech and Stuttering Institute. Sometimes I say to my wife, gee, I wonder what it would feel like to have a real job. Because this is really a labor of love. It's fun. Naturally, not all of it is fun, because as an executive director, you have to deal with budgets and make sure you have enough revenue coming in, and working with the ministry and trying to cajole them into maybe giving you some extra cash to sort of meet your objectives and so on.
Always fun.
And that's becoming harder and harder, I must say. It's more and more challenging as the health system is struggling, trying to meet the needs of the whole population of the province and so on. So that's been a bit of a struggle, the administration part and so on. But the actual rewards of seeing kids and teenagers and adults going through programs, going through treatment programs, and sort of walking out of here feeling much more liberated and much more sort of just one less thing that they have to worry about in terms of their ability to communicate. That's been the real rewards for me.
Oh, wow. That sounds really great. Yeah. It's I can see the administrative side being the real challenge.
Yeah.
For
for this whole thing?
To be honest, Ryan, the most fun I've had is when I've been sort of sitting one-on-one with a client and working with them and seeing the progress and actually doing the things that I was trained to do.
Right.
As a clinician. The other piece is doing the research and working with my colleagues at the universities and so on, and trying to discover new and better ways of treating people, and really analyzing what we're doing, how we can do it better. That's been a lot of fun as well. But as in any position, if you're around long enough, they start making you head of this and director of that, and then you have to deal with the issues.
Mm-hmm.
You have to deal with the fact that the building is too cold, or the building is too hot, or the air conditioning broke, and you have to start dealing with these kinds of things because your staff is not happy.
So is this, you're further away from what you not really want to be doing? I don't want to say that, but what you signed on for, you're taken away from that and forced and not forced to deal with other stuff, but for lack of a better.
Absolutely. I think many of us in these positions where, we assume these senior roles and become managers and directors and, we have to deal with those kinds of positions as well. We have to suddenly become human resource people, start recruiting, all of those things. Not that it's not interesting, but it's just not speech-language pathology all the time.
Right.
But it's a natural course of events, I think, that hits everybody.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, as I, beforehand, I have a few questions here that I would just like to ask, and I have been asked these a couple of times myself, just with having my stutter, and it's fairly difficult for me to answer some of these questions. So I just have a few things right here. Now, the most common perception of people having a stutter is that they're a little less intelligent, which is something I personally have had to deal with a couple of times throughout my entire life. Is there any basis in that, or is it just, like people not really understanding how it works?
I can just say, if you're an example, just having spoken to you for the last 10 minutes, then you've destroyed that perception. You're a bright young man, you have you're a self-starter, you're doing all kinds of great things. No, there's absolutely no truth to that. That's a total myth. I'm glad you asked about myths, because there are a number of myths associated with people who stutter.
Yeah.
They are, and one of them, as you mentioned, well, maybe they're a little less than intelligent, or maybe they're unsure of their topic or what they're talking about, or they feel a little insecure, or maybe they are an anxious sort of personality. Maybe they've got some psychological issues. None of these, and these have been researched since the 1940s, none of these theories have been ever substantiated. We've taken poor people who stutter through the ropes and analyzed them up, down, and everywhere. Currently, the current thinking is that there are no psychological factors that serve as the cause of stuttering. It really is, the current thinking is that it's a motoric problem. It's a physical issue. And we can get into this in a little more detail if you want to.
Yeah, of course.
We have all sorts of tools these days to analyze brain scans. We do neuroimaging of people who stutter. So we see what's going on in the brain as they stutter or as they think about talking and so on. Basically, to really simplify it, what we feel today is that stuttering is a discoordination. It's a coordination problem. So if, let's say you're a poor baseball player and when you try to throw the ball, it always goes off to the other side. Maybe like me, I don't know.
I did have that problem myself when I first started.
So what is that? That doesn't mean you're not intelligent. That doesn't mean that you're anxious. That doesn't mean that you have anything psychologically wrong. That is just how you are wired. and your coordination, your gross motor coordination, is a little bit off. Speaking requires coordination. Speaking requires coordinating your breath with your voice, with your lips to make sounds and so on, and also the processing from the brain to get those signals. And what we're finding in stuttering is that those signals are a little bit off in terms of timing. And so what we have to do in treatment is compensate for that, slow the process down, to give the whole system a little bit of a chance to make those coordinations. Just like if you were learning how to throw a ball better, you'd have a coach to show you how to grasp the ball, to show you how high or low to raise your elbow, and so on and so forth. And you do it step by step by step, and then do it over and over and over again, and through this continual practice, learn how to throw that ball better. And that's really the essence of speech therapy, where we break speech down into its units. We don't get into the heads of people saying, okay, we're going to make you smarter now, or we're going to make you more psychologically fit now. Well, no, you've got this coordination issue with speech, so let's break speech down into its components, and let us rebuild or reconstruct those components such that you will practice a more fluent way of speech. It's not easy, because, especially for an adult who's maybe 25, 35, 45 years of age or more, who's spoken in a certain way, to come to us and say, now, can I rebuild my speech? It can be done, but only with a lot of practice and a lot of concentration. But anyway, that's a long answer.
No. I have no problem with long answers at all.
Well, there's nothing inherently wrong with people who stutter in terms of their intellectual abilities or anything else.
Okay. That kind of makes sense, and that actually you, the answer that you actually answered one more question that I was going to ask, just about like what is a common cause. I mean, okay. Like that was one thing that I read was that the brain is processing things a little more faster than the muscles can comprehend, and I think you basically...
In a way, it's a coordination, yes.
Yeah.
But that said, I must probably talk a little bit about the psychology of stuttering.
Yeah, sure, go ahead. That's actually a favorite subject of mine.
A lot of, again, a myth associated with stuttering is that the person's got some psychological issues or psych problems, and that's not true. There's certainly a psychological offshoot to stuttering. If you walk around and, a lot of people don't understand stuttering, and you get stuck on a word or two or three, you start feeling, well, I wonder what that person's going to think of me. I wonder if he or she is going to feel I'm not intelligent, or any of these other misperceptions that people have. So because a person has a stutter, there often is a psychological effect to it. There is feelings of, self-consciousness at times. Young kids, teenagers who want to ask a girl out on a date might feel, gee, I don't want to ask her out on a date because I might stutter, and what is she going to think of me, and am I too nervous? Or
that was one thing that held me back personally in high school. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Or I don't want to use the phone because if I'm using the phone and I have a block, a person's going to hang up. They're not going to hear anything, and so that can happen as well. And so there are these fears and anticipations that are built up. So we're not discounting the fact that there's a psychological component to it, but it's not a cause. It's an offshoot.
Okay. That makes sense. Now, I've seen stuttering more in children and in teens, and there are some people like myself in their early 30s that still kind of have it. Have there ever been any cases of people who have never had a stutter throughout their entire life, so they've spoken not normally, but I don't want to, fluently. Yeah. And when they turn like 45, then they start developing one just out of nowhere. Has something like that ever happened, or is that a possibility?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole category of neurogenic stuttering, or late onset stuttering.
Okay, that was actually.
And That can sometimes arise as an insult to the brain. Something happens.
An insult to the brain?
Some kind of damage to the brain. It could be as a result of a minor stroke, or it could be any other kind of damage to the cortex.
So like a part of the brain sort of dies off, or just like there's a short circuit or something.
A cerebrovascular accident. There might be an aneurysm or some blood flow issues and so on. And this is what happens usually when people have strokes, or and then they wake up, or after from the stroke, and suddenly they can't talk, or they have difficulty finding words and so on. Some people will find that they begin to stutter. It all depends where in the brain this accident has occurred, this blood flow issue, or the aneurysm, or whatever has happened. So there are cases of late onset stuttering that occur. Usually it's attributed to some kind of physical issue, some kind of issue within the brain. In terms of whether or not somebody can start stuttering, even if everything else is normal, and they start stuttering later in life, there are people who will come to a clinic and say, I never stuttered, but now I'm stuttering. But if you do a little digging, a little deeper, you might find that that person was always somewhat disfluent, maybe. Maybe they had a few little bobbles like with this, but they never really paid attention to it.
Okay.
And suddenly they're in a very stressful situation. The marriage broke up, or they get into a terrible accident, or, I don't know, some horrific thing happens, and the stuttering becomes worse.
Okay, so it was always there. It was never a flat line, and then...
In some cases, that's true. In some cases. But in other cases, as I say, if something has happened in the brain, in the central nervous system, then that could be suddenly, bang, you've got some stuttering.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. That is something else.
Typically, I mean, in the vast majority of these cases, stuttering is viewed as a developmental issue. It starts in early childhood. Between the ages of 3 and 6, you start hearing things, and if it goes untreated, quite often it will progress to the adult.
Get far worse. That's actually what happened to me. I went to a speech therapist years and years and years ago, and at that time I think I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, and this was when I was living about an hour north of Toronto, and I would have to drive to Mississauga, so it just got to be a little bit much, and I just didn't want to do it, and it just kept on getting worse from there, only until I started going to therapy last year, I believe, and it helped out quite a fair bit.
That's right.
And it was, but it was, that was one thing. I wish I did that a little bit sooner. I tried to do the self-help thing, but you can only
go so far.
That's the problem. I mean, I found there were a few videos on YouTube that I saw, and of course everything sounds all great, and then you end up having to pay a disgusting amount of money to someone who you don't really know. They just say that they're a speech therapist, and it's okay, that just seems a little bit. There was one thing that was really funny. I was driving a client home from my job, and he just noticed that I slightly stuttered a bit, and he asked me if I have ever heard of Tony Robbins. I was like, well, yeah, I have heard of Tony Robbins. Yeah, like who hasn't? And he then sent me this video about Tony Robbins curing a guy's stutter, and I was like, oh, okay, that's it. I know what I know who Tony Robbins is. I've never seen anywhere on his resume speech therapist.
No.
So I was watching this video, and it showed this one guy who had just a really terrible stutter, like almost every second word. It was just. And it was just, okay, it was like, oh, wow, this is really, really bad. I knew a guy like that back in high school where the only way that he could really get himself to stop was like smacking himself right in the back of the head, which was a little like, whoa, extreme. But then when he was talking to Tony Robbins, he then was asked, when was the earliest memory of you having a stutter? And he said, when I was about 5, 6 years old or so. And he then told him to focus on that moment. And then it was almost instantly, then he stopped. And okay, hold on a second. Something just doesn't sound right. Like, you cured this guy in 5 minutes. That just seems a little bit much. But also, it seemed a little bit played up, you know?
Yeah.
It was like, okay, well, you know what? Don't be giving this kind of hope to people.
Absolutely. And one thing that your listeners should know, I don't know how far and wide your podcast goes, probably globally, but in any case...
Right now, I have it set up globally.
If we just talk about, say, this province, we're sitting here in Ontario, speech pathology, speech and language pathology, is a regulated profession. We have a college, a regulatory college of speech language pathology and audiology. As a matter of fact, we're talking to the president of that college right now.
Oh my God, one more title.
I have to put a little plug in for that. CastleCo, it's called, College of Audiology and Speech Language Pathology of Ontario.
Cool.
So there's legislation governing our field, and it is actually illegal for anyone to hold themselves out and to use the title of speech therapist or speech language pathologist or audiologist. Audiology are people who deal with the hearing.
Right.
So those are protected titles in the province. It's illegal. So if somebody calls themselves, well, Tony Robbins doesn't live in Ontario.
Yeah, I know.
So he can, but if somebody uses that title, it's illegal. The other thing I'd like to say, and for any of your listeners who are taking therapy, ask the practitioner about their credentials. Ask them, where were you trained? How much work have you done with people who stutter before? Because speech language pathology is a wide field. As I started out this morning talking about it, we deal with all sorts of problems of communication. There's a slew of different problems that we learn about in our training. And so the area of stuttering is like a subcategory of many different disorders. So when your listeners, if they're seeking help and practical advice about stuttering, make sure that the practitioner you're dealing with, A, is a registered speech and language pathologist in whatever jurisdiction they're in. Mostly in North America, there are these jurisdictions and licenses and registrating bodies. And B, not only are you registered, but how many people who stutter have you worked with? What's your what are your credentials? So make sure you ask about that. It's not like the old days where, a doctor would put on a white coat and they'd be next to God, I want you to do this and take 3 pills and yes, sir, I'll do whatever you say because you're the expert. Hopefully your generation is a little bit more advanced than my generation and my parents' generation.
Sometimes I question it when I see some things.
Yeah, but do ask questions about the people that you're dealing with. They've got to be registered, they've got to be licensed, they have to have the proper qualifications. Stuttering is very amenable to all these little tricks. If I asked you, Ryan, to tap your finger on the table and talk like this, you'd be fluent because you wouldn't have any stuttering. It's just a distraction technique. So there are all kinds of things that you can do to sort of cure the thing right in 2 minutes or in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And as you say, the people in the entertainment business might like to exaggerate a little bit. It makes for good viewing.
Yeah. Like that just, that was just kind of a very shady thing when I saw that. Now, again, like I'm not saying that Tony Robbins is a horrible person, just have to put this disclaimer out, but it was just one of those, like, and I've seen a few videos that have been like that. Yeah. And it's just like, okay, you honestly think that that's how it works? If it was that easy, I mean,
exactly.
Hell, I would have been cured years ago.
Exactly. And it does more harm than good sometimes because, as you say, it gives people
false hope. And then you could probably have the people who really don't know what they're doing, but they're still taking the people's money and they're just giving them false just false exercises to
That's
work
right.
on, or just like something that's really not going to help them. And is it
No. Yeah,
okay?
It's not right. Absolutely.
And then they end up spending a couple $1,000s, and they're
Back to school.
yeah, exactly, square one, or maybe a baby step better than they were before. It's
Yeah.
like, come on, this is really, really horrible. Now, this may be a really strange question, but if one person has a stutter and they have a child with somebody who isn't, is it possible to pass the stutter on to another child, or onto a child?
Like a parent.
Yes.
The parent stutters and the child doesn't.
Yes. Yeah.
Quite often parents will come and they are very concerned about that. That's a very good question. We know, and again, in terms of the research, there has been a lot of investigation about heredity and genetics and whether or not stuttering is carried on in families. The answers are still unclear. We know that there are some families where the dad stutters and maybe the child also develops stuttering, but then that family could have 4 children and the other 3 are fine.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting why that one child developed and the other didn't. If the question is, can you catch stuttering by just listening to somebody stutter?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
It's a very old way of thinking.
Yeah. But usually, let's say, Ryan, you came to me and you said, okay, I'm a person who stutters and I have a little boy and he's 3 or 4, I don't know, maybe not. And you would say, can I? No, okay, maybe that'll come in the future, who knows? So what I would tell you is, no, he's not going to catch stuttering from you. But a good idea would be, when I'd ask you, have you taken treatment? And as you just told me, you have recently. I'd say, obviously, they taught you some techniques. It might be a good idea when you're talking with your son or your daughter or whoever it is, to make sure, try doubly sure, that you're using your techniques and being a good model for your kid.
Right.
Because children learn from their parents, whether the parents stutter or not. Some parents come in, they don't stutter, but they talk a mile a minute, and you can't even hear what they're saying. They're talking so quickly, and they're having all kinds of disjointed sentences. What do you want to do now, Johnny? Come on, let's go. We've got to hurry. We've got to catch the bus. And it's just incredible how fast. And this poor little boy who's just learning to speak, maybe 3 years old, is trying to deal with his parents who are talking in this very sophisticated, fast, disjointed way. So we encourage parents, whether they have stuttering or not stuttering, to be good speech models for their children. Take it slowly, talk at your child's level. Remember, if your child is 3, don't talk to him like he's a first-year university student, this kind of thing, right?
Right.
And so for a parent who stutters, I would say the same thing in addition to using the techniques. This is a good practice for you to use whatever you've learned in therapy and practice that with your child.
All right, that makes sense. That makes sense, and that's actually not a terrible. Advice to give.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one thing I always found a little bit strange, is that neither of my parents stutter,
Mm-hmm.
and neither does my sister, but I'm the only one. So it's one of those. I was just trying to figure that out. Where it was just one of those, like, okay, where did I develop this? Maybe
Could have been somewhere down the line. You have developed a certain vulnerability for speech disruption, for stuttering, and maybe you had a great-great-grandmother or great-grandfather who maybe had the same vulnerability. Hard to say.
That would make an awful lot of sense. I guess I had to do some digging to find that out. Now, with the private therapists, are there any services that are covered by OHIP here in Ontario, or just in general? Are there any services that are covered by something like that for people who actually can't afford a private therapist? Because I found out that it got very expensive very, very
Absolutely.
fast.
No, it does. It does. It's very unfortunate.
I can understand why it would be expensive because it's a specialty, so it's
Yes.
one of those, like, so it makes sense. It's just, ugh.
Yes, it is very, very expensive. We have a program in Ontario called Early Abilities, which used to be called the Preschool Speech and Language Services. That is a program designed for parents of preschool children. That's a government subsidized program where if you are concerned about your child developing stuttering, you can be seen within that preschool speech and language program. Unfortunately, that cuts off at the age of about after or just prior to the entrance to senior kindergarten.
Okay.
So there's a government-funded program there. As with every government public program, there's waiting lists, and it's free. So you get your name on the waiting list, and you hope that they call you before your child ages out.
Yeah.
Right? Then, in the school system, in the public school system, not the private, but in the public school system, there are school-based services as well. Usually the school contracts with an outside agency to come into the school and to treat the children as well. Again, they're not waiting lists. After school age, after high school, very little in terms of publicly funded therapy programs for adults. So, we here at the Speech and Stuttering Institute, I'm proud to say, have never refused anyone treatment based on the ability to pay. So we offer pursuits or grants. Most people pay if they can afford to pay, so they will pay. But we have a fundraiser here, we have events. We recently had a walk for stuttering awareness that we had in September, and we raised some funds. And we keep those funds for families who can't afford the service.
Oh, wow,
So
that's very cool.
they have to pass certain criteria.
Obviously.
They have to look at their tax returns and so on. But there are a lot of people who can't afford it. And so that's another one of my jobs, trying to raise the funds through charitable donors, through some of our more wealthy donors. You saw a donor board out there when you walked in. So we have some organizations that are, our friends and patrons, and we use that money to give or to cover either partially or totally the expenses of therapy for the families.
Oh, wow, that's very, very,
yeah.
very
So
nice.
that would include adults as well.
Okay, wow. Yeah, wow. Wow, that's very, very cool. That's very, I didn't know about something like that. I know I tried to. This was before I started my own therapy. I found one program that was available through my hospital, but then when I contacted them, they said that it wasn't there that anymore. So
it used to be hospitals had outpatient clinics for speech pathology. Fewer and fewer now. It's very hard to find. And again, it's cutbacks, and they are concentrating more on acute care, having to buy all the equipment and everything else. It's just healthcare costs have just skyrocketed. So it's the people who can still walk around on the street and who are not dying that really get the short end of the stick, because they're just cutting out all of these outpatient clinics and so on. It's just going private.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I found is that there's an awful lot of privates out there, but and just like I said, I mean, it got really expensive really fast, and the health care that I got from my work, it didn't really it sounded really good on paper, and I was just, oh wow, okay, that's great. But then when you actually got the bill, you're just, okay, oh wow, that actually didn't last very long.
No, it doesn't.
Did it?
If you get a few $100s, it's like the dentist. We have a dental plan. The dentists have never been covered by the government either.
Yeah.
So you either got to pay it out of your own pocket, or you have a plan from work. In our case, the plan a year. But if you have any, that's okay. If there's nothing wrong with your teeth and you just go a few times for cleanings and stuff like that. But if you need to have an extraction, or if you need anything major, that's $600 or $700.
Yeah.
You've used it up for the year already. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
yeah, and it's so many health related professions are in the same boat where the government just doesn't have the money to fund everything.
Yeah, which makes sense. I do get that.
Yeah.
But it just goes back to the people that really want help, but they can't afford it, and it then turns into this.
Yeah. And that's why our mission here, as I said, so far we've never turned people away. Certainly we turn people away only because we don't feel that they're motivated enough, or they don't, they're not here, or their mother is dragging the kid, but the kid really doesn't want to be here, and it's just going to be an issue.
Yeah.
And so we say maybe now's not the best time. But in terms of finances, we never turned anyone away. Sometimes we have to say no. We can't offer you a grant because you're making too much money. Some people will come and say, I have a big mortgage in my house, and we've got these 2 cars on payments, and that's a lifestyle choice that you're making.
Yeah, nobody told you to do this.
You're making good money, but you don't have any extra money for health care. We can't subsidize your house or your 2 cars.
Yeah.
And so it's for the people who really are, single moms, people who are maybe newly arrived, highly educated, but can't get a job here because they, were trained as a lawyer somewhere else, but now have to write the bar exams, and they can't practice. They really don't have any money right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different thing. Or somebody who's been unemployed, or somebody who's on disability, or somebody who's on welfare. Obviously, those are legitimate cases, and so those are the people who try.
Well, and they are the people that really need it the most. So that's very, very cool that you guys do something like that.
Because once we worked it out financially for the society in general, that if you take a person from unemployment or because of a severe communication disorder to employable and to, a gainful or productive citizen in society, they're going to pay more taxes. The government is going to benefit after that, right? Because they're going to be paying much more in taxes. And so that's an argument we always use in terms of our funders, for the government to really do pour in a little bit extra. Because if we can sort of help these people out to become more productive in the world and in our province, then the government is only going to benefit from that through their contribution.
Exactly, and there's nothing wrong with having more people out there actually providing something for society and trying to make things, hopefully trying to make things a little bit better for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's really struggling with this, who's probably listening to this right now, who may feel like not trapped by this, but just they don't know where to go?
Well, first thing that I would say is there is help out there. Our field has advanced. I can say that, as I mentioned before, it's always fun to see the progress that people make, and it's amazing. So people should understand that even though they may have had negative experiences before with therapy, or they tried, maybe they didn't go to the right person, maybe they didn't go to programs that were really dealing with stuttering in depth and in an intensive way. Things have changed. The other thing I would say is don't believe everything you read on the internet. Anybody could post anything. Try, if they want to find out a little bit more about stuttering, you can look at the website that we have, the Speech and Stuttering Institute. It's called speechandstuttering.com. And lots of stuff there about stuttering, about our programs. Not that this is an ad or anything. look at a website called the Stuttering Foundation of America that's based in Memphis.
Okay.
They are not a therapy program, but they have a lot of information for people who stutter. They're like a clearinghouse for people who stutter. Excellent website there. And they have lists of agencies across North America who would offer specialized therapy programs for people who stutter. For parents of very young children who are worried that their child is going to have stuttering, try to look up your local speech and language pathologist, again, making sure that they're qualified, licensed, registered, whatever the case may be. And it wouldn't hurt to have them assessed early on, just to see maybe lots of things that parents can do to head off this problem. So there is hope out there. And it's 2017, and there's no, we don't do any hocus pocus. All of our treatments are evidence-based, and we're a legitimate scientific field. So
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah. And you mentioned, Ryan, when you were 10 or 12 that you went to therapy and didn't really, plus the driving.
Yeah.
10 or 12, those are the most challenging years for us because the kids don't really see the importance of speech yet. Mom and dad does all the talking for them. You go into the McDonald's with your mom and you say, I want a quarter pounder and fries and a Coke, Mom. You don't have to order it. Your mom does, or your dad, or your older brother. And so kids at 10 or 12 have not yet understood or taken on the responsibility for communication.
Yeah.
And it's hard because we ask them to do all these things and to practice. And how do I have to? My mom's going to do it.
Yeah, that was one thing I kind of wished that my younger self really took it serious.
I know.
Just a little more seriously, but there's nothing I can do about that.
There's so many like you.
Yeah.
And then they come back when they're 18 or 25. So, I'm going to university now, and I've got these seminar courses, and I've got to make presentations, and speech is an important thing all of a sudden. My mom is not going to come and do that for me anymore.
Well, she probably could, but
Yeah.
Your grade may go down quite a bit.
Exactly. So, the younger the student is, the harder it is for them to realize the importance of communication.
Yeah. Okay, so whoever's listening who has young kids, force them to do it. Well, not force them to do it, but just try and emphasize the importance of this whole thing. And I can state from experience that it is quite helpful to have something like that. All right, Bob. Well, thank you very much for meeting with me today to do this whole thing. And
pleasure.
Yeah, and once again, thank you very much for being my first ever the interviewee. This is.
Well, I think you did a great job, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My strength is not in I don't think I'm an interviewer. I'm more of a conversationalist.
Okay.
So I would just
next time I'll interview you.
Okay. Let's see how that. All right, let's see how that goes. Okay, Bob. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.